This is an ABC 30 Action News special presentation. Vote 2010, the Candidates Debate.
Good evening and welcome to our ABC 30 Vote 2010 special, the 19th Congressional District Republican Candidate Debate. I'm Warren Armstrong, and I want to welcome all four of our Republican candidates at this time. They are next to me, Richard Pombo, Jim Patterson, Larry Westerlin, and Jeff Denham. Thank you all for being here to take part in this debate today. Joining me to question the candidates tonight are my colleague and Action News co-anchor Nancy Osborne and political reporter John Ellis from the Fresno Bee. We've also asked representatives from the League of Women Voters to help with the timing of the candidates' responses. And the candidates drew lots to determine who gets the first question. That first question goes to Richard Pombo, and I'll ask that first. The four of you have many things in common, Mr. Pombo, including that you all say you are conservative, the conservative. What are your conservative credentials that separate you from the other three standing here?
Well, I think that if you look at my record and my history, in terms of the time that I did serve in office, I had a record and history of actually getting things done, of working and taking the fight on when a lot of other people weren't willing to do that. I had the opportunity to move forward on issues that were very important to the Central Valley, like the Endangered Species Act and water issues, public lands issues, things that truly matter to the people of the Central Valley. I also had the opportunity to work on agricultural issues. I was the vice chairman of the Ag Committee while I served in the House of Representatives. And in doing that, I had the opportunity to make a real difference and push forward with issues that really did matter to the Central Valley.
Mr. Patterson, again, the question to you, your conservative credentials that separate you from the other three standing here.
Well, thank you, Warren, and thank you, Channel 30. First of all, I've made it as clear as I can be that I'm a conservative first and a Republican second. And I think that we have seen some very difficult times in Washington as a result of Republicans who sometimes weren't quite as conservative as they say they are. And secondly, I was elected for two terms as the mayor of Fresno, and I think we did a lot of things that people would consider conservative. We did a few things exceedingly well, and we balanced our budgets. We hired police officers without raising taxes. We cut the time and the cost of doing business. Fresno went from ridicule to recognition as an all-America city. And we did those things with limited government. We did them with conservative fundamental principles. And I think those same kinds of experiences both at City Hall and in my private life demonstrate a conservatism that I hope the people can trust.
All right, Mr. Westerlin, the same question to you, please.
Yes, what my credentials are as a conservative and what differentiates me between my fellow candidates up here is, one, I was locally born and raised, born in the 19th Congressional District, raised in the 19th Congressional District, know the Central Valley issues, have known it since I was raised and born up here. Second of all, a lieutenant commander in the Navy Reserve. I still serve our country today. You may have recalled I was the city council member that was recalled back to active duty in 2008 and served overseas going after Al-Qaeda in the Sahara Desert for a year. And then the other part that I think shows my credentials, I carried a badge for 5 years as a deputy district attorney in Tulare County, and I've prosecuted meth dealers. I've prosecuted criminals and put them in jail. And I think that's what distinguishes me from my other colleagues.
Thank you. Mr. Denham, the same question on your conservative credentials.
Well, I'm conservative both on the social side as well as economics. My parents had me when they were teenagers, and it wasn't a choice for them. I believe in the sanctity of life. I've always been a strong pro-life candidate. And on guns, I believe that in our right to bear arms, not just for hunting or home protection in rural America, but it was something that I fought for in the military, our freedoms that set us apart. On economic issues, my record speaks for itself. They tried to recall me because I would not support an unbalanced budget. I wouldn't support tax increases, and I fought back. And I'm going to continue to fight back. I'm somebody, what you see is what you get. I think there are real issues worth fighting for, and our national debt is out of control. We can no longer allow China to control our economy, to control our national debt. Over $1 trillion they have of our $14 trillion that we have in debt today.
Thank you very much, candidates. This next group of questions is specific to the candidate. No responses from the other three regarding it. Instead, we have a specific question for each one of you. I'll start with Mr. Patterson. You've seen those TV ads and those mailers that claim as mayor of Fresno you sunk the city deeper into debt, you added bureaucracy, you inflated budgets. You're a big spender, sir. We can't afford. How do you respond to those accusations?
Well, first and foremost, I don't think I necessarily have to respond to them, because I think the Fresno Bee did that quite effectively in an article, which basically said those attacks were false. They just simply were wrong, number one. Number two, in the 4 years that I was strong mayor of Fresno and produced budgets in Fresno as the chief elected executive, I was able to produce and pass 4 budgets that grew at 1.5% per year, 6% total in that entire 4-year period. And we were able to do it, I think, with good old-fashioned hard conservative work. And yes, some of the information is true. I did hire a lot of, quote, high-paid bureaucrats, 384 of them to be exact. They were Fresno police officers at a time when this city's crime rate was out of control. We cut the crime rate, we cut car thefts, we became an all-America city again, and I am proud of that record.
Now let's turn to Nancy Osborne for a specific question to Larry Westerlin.
Mr. Westerlin, during your tenure on the Fresno City Council, you voted to use city funds to support loans to 2 costly and inevitably failed organizations, Granite Park and the Met Museum. The loans then came due when they failed, and both closed down. The city picked up the tab for those 2 loans and, in fact, are bonded out for much more than they were actually worth. Explain those votes and why you agreed to the loans.
Well, thank you. And certainly, if I may correct something, I was not on the council when they did the development deal for Granite Park. But I do, and I don't shrink from my responsibility for the Metropolitan Museum and that deal. You know, and it was, and it still is today, an investment in the city, an investment in downtown that we have had for a long time, a very strong desire for this downtown to grow and to become the center of the valley, if you will, as the largest city in the valley. You know, if you and I wanted to get in the car, I can go show you where those dollars are at right now. And it's invested in a city block, it's invested in a beautiful building. And I think, and we have a request for proposal out on the street right now, that will be a centerpiece, a beautiful piece that someday will be a magnet for the rest of redevelopment for the city of Fresno. So, yeah, in hindsight, things could have been done differently, and we certainly didn't understand that we'd have the credit markets crash the way they did, but it's an investment in the city of Fresno.
Now to John Ellis from the Fresno Bee with a specific question for Jeff Denham.
Mr. Denham, there have been some questions about these ads that have been running on several Valley TV stations and radio involving the benefit concert for Gold Star families. I think they're sponsored by a group called Remembering the Brave. Can you please explain how these ads are not electioneering and how they are not a violation of federal election law? And also, I would be curious to know, yes or no, have you contributed any money from your state Senate account to any group involved in producing this ad?
Well, first of all, let me start with that. Yes, I have. I've donated over $25,000 and also gave them a loan for their capital to start the concert itself. It's not electioneering, as you'll see on the ads. It says State Senator Jeff Denham. I have a job to do. I've been elected by the people of our community to represent them in the state Senate, and I've done it proudly. I'm a veteran who served my country. I don't shrink away from either of those responsibilities. I have introduced the bill on the Gold Star license plate. I currently chair the Veterans Committee, and the Gold Star license plate, now that we've got it signed and passed, we need to raise the funds to honor those that have served our country and those that have paid the ultimate sacrifice. So I'm proud of what I'm doing. The question is, the others should be willing to contribute as well. Richard Pombo is a big cattle rancher, and we've got an executive producer over here. Larry Westerlin served his country, so I don't expect him to contribute, but have the others contribute too, and I'm sure that they could be involved in the concert as well. But it's something I'm very proud of, and I hope everybody turns out for the benefit concert itself.
Mr. Denham, thank you. Now to Mr. Pombo. Let's talk about that family vacation you took a few years ago in that big RV that we've seen on the TV ads. Not that one. But, sir, according to reports, that was at taxpayers' expense. Who did pay for that, and how do you explain that trip?
Well, according to those reports, that's a lie. I did, as chairman of the Resources Committee, had the responsibility of visiting our national parks. And I did that, but unlike my predecessors, I did not take an Air Force jet. I rented an RV and went to the parks. My family did go with me on that trip, and I paid 100% of the expense of them being on that trip. All their meals, their entrance fees into the park, any souvenirs that we bought when we went into the park, I paid for everything that had to do with my family. The only thing the taxpayer paid for is what they would have paid for me to go. But unlike my predecessors, I did not take a private jet in order to make that happen. I'm proud of what I did because I actually saw the parks the way American people see them, and at the time that it happened, I was widely praised for actually going out into the parks and seeing them like real families do.
Mr. Pombo, candidates, thank you very much. Now we'll go back to one question for all four candidates, and Nancy has that next question to Mr. Patterson.
Mr. Patterson, the San Joaquin River, of course, was once wild, and the Delta was once pristine. The California Aqueduct added water availability, as did the Friant Dam in the 40s. Well, today the battle over water pits people versus ecological concerns. So how do we solve the long-term needs and at the same time make room for those other needs? And what will you bring to Congress specifically to garner the support for a majority of its members to keep water sources reliable, renewable, and clean for all the stakeholders?
Thank you. That's really an important question, Nancy. And you can go to jimpatterson.com on the website, and there is a framework of the kind of legislation that I would like to pass and would join with others in Washington. I would like to see the San Joaquin restoration undone. It is taking 500,000 acre-feet out of the San Joaquin watershed. The city of Fresno takes water from that. Farmers and agriculture do as well. So what I did was I put together some of the best minds in the 19th Congressional District, from the Madera Irrigation District, the Chowchilla Irrigation District, Friant, others, farmers, other water users. And I asked them, what do we need to do in order to fix the San Joaquin River? And they came up with a very good suggestion, which is to first undo the damage that was done with legislation, and then replace it with a warm water fishery that would not only restore some ecological balance there, but it would also assure the return of the water to farmers as well. I think it's a good framework that answers the question, and I'm going to try my best to pass it if I get to Washington.
Mr. Patterson, thank you. Mr. Westerlund, the same question?
Yes, you know, to begin with, we have got to rebuild and extend the infrastructure that we have for water in this state, and particularly the Central Valley. We haven't had an investment in water infrastructure in nearly 35 years. And we need to build the Temperance Flats Dam. We need to do real conservation. We need to do surface and subsurface storage. And when I got back from being overseas and serving our country, I sponsored a resolution through the Fresno City Council. For the first time, the city took a position on that. The other part of it is that the Delta and the health of the Delta, and how are we going to deal with that? Right now, we have the radical environmentalists who are trying to balance the health of the Delta on the back of West Side farmers, and that has a direct impact to the city of Fresno. I sponsored a resolution saying that we need to stop Sacramento from dumping their ammonia into the Delta, and we saw today in the paper that studies have indicated that that ammonia is destroying the Delta even more than any diversions, and that's what we need to do. Thank you.
Mr. Denham, the same question to you regarding the water situation.
Well, we've seen several different bonds over the last couple of decades on water quality. The real issue is water storage. We have a bond on the November ballot that is doomed to fail right now. I believe that we first need to amend it, take out the pork that people are questioning, things that have nothing to do with water storage at all, and then move it to 2012. That's an amendment that we can make through the legislature. But the real question is, what do we do now? I'm a farmer here. We have farmers that are going out of business, so we've got farms that can't hire people today. We've got an economy that has 20% unemployment. We need solutions today. The time for asking permission is over. It's obvious the Obama administration does not want to help to turn on the pumps. We've got to take actions into our own hands. Now, a year ago, they would have said this couldn't happen. We've seen it with Arizona. We need to take our states' rights issues into our own hands and let the rest of the nation know that we're going to fight for the breadbasket of the world. We've got rights here, and water is one of those rights that isn't government water. It's our water.
Thank you. Mr. Pombo, solving the water crisis.
Well, it's a great question because it's much more complicated than the sound bites that we may be able to give you right now. Protecting the health of the Delta, it should be a priority of all of us. We should have clean water that is available not only for our cities and industries, but also for agriculture. And as Larry said, a big part of this is we have to redevelop our infrastructure in this state. You know, right now we're operating off of infrastructure that was designed in the late 40s and early 50s, and we've done nothing since then to update that to the point that we can actually take care of a growing population and a growing economy. And quite frankly, when we talk about the radical environmental groups asking us to make a choice between protecting the environment or having economic growth, it's a false choice. We don't have to choose one or the other. We can have a healthy, vibrant Delta and at the same time have a growing economy. When they tell people you have to choose one or the other, they are not being honest with you. A new infrastructure, a new way of looking at things is exactly what we need to do in order to solve this problem.
Gentlemen, thank you. Now to John Ellis, another question for Mr. Westerlund.
Well, I'll follow on Nancy's, where she took us and where you guys answered. Once again, we hear a lot of proposals for building infrastructure. We have trillion-dollar deficits. Once again, I would like you guys to specifically tell me how we're going to pay for all these billions of dollars worth of infrastructures that's obviously needed. Temperance Flat by itself would be a multi-billion-dollar project, and where in the federal government's budget we're going to cut to be able to fund these projects.
Well, thank you very much for the question. And as I've stated before and on the record, we need to pass the water bond, whether it's this time or if it gets pulled back and redone again. My question and my concern is that it's going to be another 10 years before we get a water bond bill on the ballot, and we don't have that kind of time. The West Side doesn't have that kind of time. Fresno and California doesn't have that time. So that takes care of it, I think, on the state side, at least a step in the right direction. But then most of all, and you need to understand that for water infrastructure, most of it is done by the ratepayers. You know, people on the West Side pay for their water. The city of Fresno pays for their water. Oakdale pays for their water. And those ratepayers actually put in the money to actually build the infrastructure. And that's how we're going to build the infrastructure going forward.
Mr. Denham, the same question to you regarding how do we pay for it?
I believe it's a pay-as-you-go. We currently have a water bond right now today. That bond needs to be amended. We need to amend it and move it to a future year, as I said before. On our roads, we passed a transportation bond. $1 billion on Highway 99 will help to fix our thoroughfares here locally. But the real issue is, from a national perspective, is earmarks. You know, there are those that continue to go out and ask for earmarks, the Bridge to Nowhere, a lot of these famous projects that get hidden into bills. I believe that's un-American. I've taken a pledge against it. Now, I will go out there and fight in the budget, in transparency, but I think we've got to not only get rid of earmarks, but we've got to reduce our debt in the process. And the only way to reduce our debt is not just to get rid of some of this wasteful spending, but we need to have more revenue coming in, and that's done by tax cuts and getting businesses running again.
Now back to Mr. Pombo, please.
Well, it's a great question, and if you want to know exactly how you pay for it, when you build a big dam, a multiple-use dam, part of it is paid for by the production of electricity. Part of it is paid for by, you know, the federal portion of that being the flood control part of the dam. Part of it is paid for by the use of the water, those who are the ultimate beneficiary of the water that comes through that particular dam. Those are the ways that you pay for it, and it is a user pay, whoever benefits from it. The flood control part of the dam can be paid for through the flood insurance. The federal government plays a role in this. The state government plays a role in this. But quite frankly, it's the ultimate end user of those that benefit from that particular dam or that particular water project that pay for it in the end. And that's the right way to go. The federal government may step in to help get it going, but in the end, it is the ultimate ratepayer and water user who will pay for the dam.
And finally, to Mr. Patterson, show me the money.
Well, John, good question. And first things first. The other colleagues here have mentioned ways of paying for it and all of that. But first things first. 500,000 acre-feet are going out of the San Joaquin River right now because of a restoration act that most people think was a mistake and needs to be replaced. The warm water fishery that I have proposed can be paid for with existing sources of money. It already, quite frankly, is budgeted, and in fact, the proposals that I've made actually save money because it reduces the amount of flow that has to come out, but still has some ecological soundness to it based on a whole lot of good input from a lot of great people in the San Joaquin River water area. First thing is to get that water restoration back flowing. 500,000 acre-feet is a huge amount of water, and if we'll do the kind of legislation that I'm suggesting, and other members of Congress are looking to support as well, we can have water, we can have it quickly, and we can have it affordably.
Mr. Denham, the next question is to you, and you raised an interesting point. You said you're against earmarks. What about farm subsidies? There are those who believe that farm subsidies are no different than earmarks. Would you also do away with farm subsidies?
Actually, if you look at California farming, we get far fewer subsidies than the rest of the nation, even though we are the #1 ag state. So absolutely, I do think that we can wean ourselves off of the subsidies. Is something that we should be striving for this year and every year.
All right, we'll go to Mr. Pombo with the same question, please.
Well,
subsidies.
Yeah, thank you, and I think this is a great question, because as the vice chairman of the Agriculture Committee, one of the amendments that I offered was to do away with all the subsidies, all the commodity subsidies, and get rid of them all, and to instead shift the money toward basic research and foreign market development. I feel that the future of agriculture, because agriculture today operates in an international economy, it's no longer California competing against Florida. It's the United States competing against Chile or competing against New Zealand. And if we want to be able to compete in that international market, we need to develop crops and products that are value-added products in this country, be able to keep the jobs at home, the production at home, and be able to compete on an international market. That's where our future in agriculture is. It is not in subsidized crops. It's not about the way it was in the 1930s. Our farmers today have to be able to compete in an international market, and the only way that we're going to get there is by changing our complete system.
Mr. Patterson?
Good. Thank you. First of all, I think the bigger and broader question has to do with subsidies in general. We see the government doling out literally billions and trillions of dollars to underwrite and undergird all kinds of new approaches to energy or agriculture and other ways. We know that when the government subsidizes something, we know that it is unable to reach the marketplace and to do so on its own in a free market with a free society and a free economy. And so not only do we need to reduce and get off of this notion of agricultural subsidies, we've got to get off of this notion that we subsidize all kinds of other things in order to bring them to the marketplace. The first and foremost success story of anything coming to the marketplace, is it affordable? Is it competitive? Can it stand on its own in the free market? And can it be sustained over time? Our agriculture can do that. I also think an awful lot of new technology can do it as well.
Thank you. Mr. Westerlund, again, the same question. Subsidies.
I believe that free markets lead to free people. We are a democracy based on free markets. And when we let free markets do what they're supposed to do, they set the price, they set how resources are supposed to be distributed and are best and most efficiently distributed throughout the system. I believe that we need to cut subsidies, that we need to look at all of them across the board. Because when those subsidies are cut, we know and we understand what works and what doesn't work. You know, just as we have seen the bailouts of Wall Street here as of late, and we've seen the takeover by the federal government of car companies that if they're not producing a product that people want to buy, that have confidence in it, then they need to be able to allow it to be fail. We cannot be the mommy government that takes care of everyone and everything. And that is one of the big problems and one of the reasons why I want to go back to Washington and represent you.
Gentlemen, for this next round of questions, I need to limit your answers, please, to 30 seconds. We'll go back to Nancy with a question for Richard Pombo.
Okay, I wanted to follow up on earmarks. And when I say earmarks, I mean whether it's farm subsidies or the auto industry or whatever. Is there anyone you would vote for?
Is there any earmark I would vote for? Absolutely. I would vote for an earmark that made its way through the committee process, was an authorized program that made its way through the committee process and was supported by a majority of members of Congress, just as the Constitution outlines as the responsibility of the House of Representatives.
Mr. Patterson.
No, I'm not going to vote for earmarks because earmarks, by their very nature, do precisely the wrong thing. They're essentially somebody's special interest giveaway. We've got to say no to it in order to say yes. And then we can say yes to going and earning and being persuasive and persistent about what we need in the 19th District and in California. We need to earn our money from Washington by virtue of the fact that we are persuasive about the importance of it. And I think that's a direction we can take.
Mr. Westerlund, 30 seconds, please.
Yes, you know, earmarks are part of the problem, part of the reason that we have as many issues as we have with Washington. I believe that every expenditure should go through the process that is outlined in the Constitution. It goes through the committee process. It's voted on up or down by the House of Representatives, goes to the Senate, and then goes to the White House for signature. You know, because we have earmarks, we have lobbyists that have more control and more power than they should in Washington.
Mr. Denham, please.
The answer is no. I'm the only one up here that's actually taken a pledge against earmarks. I think that it's important. Just like you take a pledge against taxes, this is something that's un-American. Just by its very name of earmarks, it suggests that it's a payoff. You should be able to fight for it in the budget if it's something that is important to your community and has a national issue. So it's something that we need to all be saying no to. You shouldn't be holding up an equipment bill for our military that are in harm's way because you're trying to hide something in the middle of the night into a bill.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Candidates, thank you. We have much more ahead for you. We still have to tackle immigration and much more. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Action News debate between the four candidates seeking the 19th Congressional District Republican nomination. Once again, our responses will be 1 minute in length. Let's get a question from John Ellis for Jim Patterson.
Mr. Patterson, we all know that immigration is an issue. We all know that our Central Valley needs workers. They depend on workers that are come from foreign countries and do the hard work that's required in the fields. Can you tell us, everybody, tell us about your plan to handle this issue, how we both deal with the 12 million illegal immigrants that are in this country, how we provide an adequate amount of workers for our Central Valley farms, and how we pay to secure our borders and deal with the 12 million immigrants and get those workers that we need to work the Valley farms.
Thank you, John. Well, first and foremost, a nation that does not have its borders under control simply is not a nation, and it is losing its sovereignty. And Arizona has had to resort to taking its own future in its own hands. So I was asked directly once in a debate, do I support Arizona and would I have voted if I were in the legislature? The answer is yes, because it's an absolute failure of the federal government to secure our borders, first and foremost. So before anything else, the borders must be secure. I think, secondly, we have to make sure that these magnets that we have in California, the kind of welfare and the kind of subsidies for education and the kind of hospitalization and care that we are giving for illegals, these are magnets that draw folks here. And then finally, I think we've got to have a tamper-proof, fool-proof technology for those who want to be here legally. And then we can have a controlled border, and then we can have common sense approaches to getting people in and out of the United States who want to work.
Mr. Westerlund, the same question regarding immigration.
Yes, thank you. You know, several weeks ago, somebody thrust a microphone in front of my mouth and asked, so what do you think about Arizona? And I told them then, as I've told people up and down the 19th Congressional District, is we need to support Arizona. Arizona has done what they need to do to secure their borders. For them, this is a national security issue. We have hit squads that come across the border who are kidnapping and killing American farmers in Arizona. Phoenix has become the abduction capital of the United States. This is a national security issue, and we have got to secure that border. So I applaud Arizona for what they've done. They've taken a stand, and they're asking the federal government to do what they should have been doing from the very beginning under the Constitution, and that is to protect our borders. I just got back from working overseas with the Special Operations Task Force, trying to help African partners to secure their borders in the Sahara Desert, where al-Qaeda is operating. We need to secure our borders.
All right, please. Mr. Denham on immigration, please.
Well, there's some that are saying that it's just too complicated, or there's magnets, or we've got to piecemeal this together. It's not about just rounding them up. It's enforcing our laws, one by one. As our police officers pull over somebody and find out they don't have the proper documentation and they're breaking the law, we need to enforce that law. And yes, that means deportation. Long term, absolutely, we've got to have a program that works. But today we've got real problems. And Arizona has taken those problems into their own hands. If a small state like Arizona can do it, our large ag economy, our large state, our big economic driver can do it as well.
Mr. Pombo on immigration.
Well, thank you. And the way that I would answer the question is, first and foremost, we have to secure our borders. Whether that involves putting the National Guard or our military at our borders, the number one responsibility of the federal government is to protect our country and our people, and that has to start with guarding our borders. But having said that, if you remember what happened between East and West Germany and the wall that they put up, people will go to great lengths to seek freedom, and that's part of the problem. We have to be able to have a guest worker program in place so that people who want to come to this country and work, who want to offer their kids, their grandkids a better life, a shot at something better, we have to have a guest worker program so that we can use that so that people can come in. And finally, we have to go after our welfare system. It is a magnet that brings people in who don't necessarily want to work, but people who are coming here because they're seeking those benefits, and we have to stop the ability for those people to come in and take advantage of those benefits.
Mr. Pombo, thank you. Mr. Westerlund, I have a question for you, and let's piggyback on what John had to talk about there. I know you said you approved the Arizona law, but what I didn't hear was regarding the question itself. How do we secure our borders? Specific answers to make sure that we have the necessary immigrant workforce for the various industries like ag that rely on that immigrant workforce.
Well, first of all, I believe in the barrier. And we have a barrier in California for a great deal of it, but now it's forcing people through Arizona, and that's part of the problem and the issue. I think very strongly that we need to have comprehensive immigration reform, which requires and includes a very strong guest worker program. So I don't know if this is a full minute answer on this one. It is, okay. So yeah, it's a bit of a puzzle. You can't pull out one piece without being able to have the other. Based on our agricultural-based economy, we need to have those workers to be able to come in. People who want to better their economic status, who want to come in. And, we've tried to get people, and I know farmers who've tried to get people who are here to work those jobs, that they just won't work. So we need to have a comprehensive program with a strong guest worker program that secures our borders.
All right, Mr. Denham, let's move on to you. And let me evolve this question a little bit for you. We haven't heard from you about Arizona. Do you believe this new immigration law in Arizona invites racial profiling? Would it work in California?
No, I don't think that it invites racial profiling. In fact, I think if you read the bill, it states exactly the opposite. It has a mandate in there against racial profiling. But we need to do a better job here in this state. Absolutely, we've got to secure our border, not just with a wall or a fence, but making sure that there are no tunnels or are no other ways to get through, and making sure that we actually have a workforce along our border, whether that's the Border Patrol, or if we're not getting the federal support, we move our National Guard in there. And as far as having a guest worker program, we had a Bracero program that worked. There were some faults with it, but rather than throw it out, we needed to make it workable. My wife is first generation here. Her father came over in the Bracero program, and he was looking for a better life, sending money home to the family, and then eventually got his legal citizenship. We have a legal way to citizenship here, but breaking the law, we've got to enforce those laws.
All right, Mr. Pombo, do you see this law in Arizona inviting racial profiling?
No, it absolutely does not. If you actually read the law, it does prohibit racial profiling, but what it does is it allows the law enforcement officials in the state of Arizona, if they pull somebody over and they suspect that they are not a legal resident of the United States, it asks them to prove they are. It's been the law in this country since the 1940s that anybody who was legally in this country, not a citizen of the country, but legally in this country, had to carry proof of residency, proof of how they came into the country, whether that was a green card, whether it was some visa that allowed them to come in. It's been a federal and part of the federal law in this country for over 60 years. There's no reason why we can't allow our local law enforcement the ability to enforce those laws and pull somebody in if they feel that they are not. It also requires them to notify the federal officials if they suspect the person is not legally in this country.
All right, Mr. Patterson, back to this immigration stew that we've stirred up here now. Okay. Does it invite racial profiling? No. I know you support the law, but does it?
No, it doesn't. And I think we have to make a real strong, hard distinction between illegal immigration and legal immigration. My oldest son, BJ, is a plumber. He was a refugee from Vietnam. We went through the process of getting BJ to become a legal citizen and a resident here, and we're very, very proud of him. And legal immigration is so important because people come here because they want to be citizens and they want to be Americans. Not just a temporary workforce. So first and foremost, let's make sure that people who want to be here because of all the right reasons go through the right process. And then secondly, we have to end criminal illegal immigration. That's one of the reasons that Arizona is in such difficulty. We have people who are coming because they're part of a drug cartel, they're gang members, they're setting up meth labs, they're setting up marijuana operations, and they're distributing across the United States. This is criminal illegal behavior that's got to end.
Gentlemen, thank you. Let's get another question from Nancy. This goes to Mr. Denham.
I was going to see if I could answer the racial profile side of it.
All right, give me 15 seconds.
I'll just be very quick. You don't see it necessarily in the mainstream media, but the law is very specific. You cannot be pulled over for what you look like, your color. You actually have to be pulled over for another offense, either a broken light or speeding or something like that. And the discussion is over if you can produce a California or a Arizona driver's license in a story.
Okay, thank you. All right, Nancy, now to Mr. Denham.
You.
Well, let's just move on to a different topic at this point. For nearly a month now, oil has been spewing into the Gulf of Mexico as a result of a failed oil company's ability to keep its rigs going, and had a terrible disaster there. 11 people were killed. But in the meantime, this is a growing catastrophic event taking place in the seas, which may, in fact, if everyone's right, be headed for the tip of Florida and around the edge. So what should be done at the federal level to prevent such a disastrous environmental consequences like this in the future? And do you, as individuals and as candidates, support Governor Schwarzenegger's choice to halt expansion of oil drilling off the California coast?
This is back to Mr. Denham now.
Yeah.
First of all, on Tranquillion Ridge, the oil project that the governor first supported, it is a new technology. It's slant drilling that goes into the ocean from land. It is the new type of technology that we need. The problem is we've got these old oil wells that have sat out there for years with no maintenance because of lawsuits, and some of them are now falling apart. So rather than go backwards because we're at a time of crisis, we need to move forward and make sure we're not only taking the old oil wells out, but drilling the new ones that are supported. This one, the Tranquillion Ridge one off the Santa Barbara coast, was supported by a number of different environmental groups because it is new technology that is much better than the oil wells that are off the coast right now. But we've got to become self-sufficient as a nation. We can no longer rely on other nations' oil, and it's time that we look at our own oil exploration, and this should not halt that.
Mr. Pombo?
It was a human tragedy, and it's becoming an environmental tragedy. But I will remind you that after Katrina, there were over 100 rigs that were blown off of their mooring. Some of them were blown 100 miles from where they originally were, and we didn't spill a drop of oil. the technology that is there does work. What has happened with this particular case is they had a faulty valve, there was some liability, and BP should be held responsible for cleaning that up, and I fully support doing that. As far as the governor, no, I disagree with him. I disagreed with him before. I carried the legislation that would have given the state of California 150 miles to make the decision off of their coast as to whether or not to allow offshore oil drilling. The governor opposed it then. He changed his mind on that, and now he's changed his mind back again. He was wrong before, he's wrong now. We should be developing American energy to provide for our American economy. We are dependent on foreign countries for 70% of our energy today.
Time, please. Thank you, Mr. Patterson.
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, we are going to have difficult spills, and technology is going to break, and we are going to have to fix it. That's just the nature of progress, and I actually think that when all of this is said and done, BP is going to step up and do their duty, and I think that we are going to learn what it takes to make these oil wells much more secure. But we can't just decide that because once in a while a good piece of technology goes bad. We have to make it better. And secondly, I think we've also got to go after the offshore oil, the offshore gas, the gas that's in our own continental United States. I think we do need to do some drilling up in Alaska and find ways of getting weaned off of oil from countries that don't particularly like us one way or the other. And also, we've got to be looking at nuclear energy as well, wean ourselves off of old technologies and wean us off of technologies that other places are moving away from.
Thank you, Mr. Westerling.
Yes, you know, first of all, it was a tragedy for the 11 lives that were lost there, and it's a tragedy in the environment as well. You know, but we always overreact. We react stupidly because we overreact, and we don't think about the consequences. You know, if we stop the drilling off our shores, of which is a huge part of our energy requirement and energy consumption, it means we just have to import it from the Middle East. Less than 1% of any and all the oil that is dumped into or lost into the ocean comes from offshore drilling. Actually, the other 99% of it has to do with ships traversing the Suez Canal or around the Horn that run into something, like the Valdez. You know, so we have got to remember, if we do this, what's our other consequence? What's the other reaction to it? We have to take reasonable and smart, prudent steps to ensure safety of the environment, but overreacting is a stupid one.
Gentlemen, thank you. Back to John Ellis with a question for Mr. Pombo.
I'm going to kind of go to like a foreign policy type issue. You guys might come across it. And I just want to philosophically, when it comes to choosing our allies, what do you feel is more important? A strategic advantage they might provide us, no matter what sort of political system that nation might have in place, or moral principles that are important to us as a nation?
Again, Mr. Pombo.
I believe that moral principles would be more important, and the reason that I believe that is if you look at the behavior of nations internationally, the ones who tend to side with us in international policy and international politics are the ones who share our values. And I believe it is more important for us to look at nations who share our values, with a democracy, nations that have the ability to join with us in whatever fights we have, whatever actions we have, whether it's international environmental law or whether it's wars with nations or whether it's trying to stop a rogue country from developing a nuclear weapon. We are much better off joining together with nations who share our values than we are just going after a particular nation who may have a strategic advantage in terms of helping us. Those always seem to backfire on us. When we got involved with Iran before, or Iraq before, or when we were in Afghanistan before, it always blew up in our faces. We need to look for countries who share our values.
Mr. Patterson.
Well, first of all, I'm a Reagan Republican, and Mr. Reagan said we get peace through strength, and we must trust but verify. And that was during the Cold War and lots of big challenges that we were able to overcome. Because first and foremost, America decided that it was going to lead by example. And we were going to find nation states that agreed with our free markets, that agreed with our principles of constitutional rule of law, that were willing to take on the kinds of changes that we would help them to develop. And as a result, Mr. Reagan and Thatcher and others were able to turn the tide where the communist nations were left behind in the Dust Bowl of history. We can do that here and now today. And whether it is in the Middle East or Africa or other places, we need to find people who believe like we do, support them if they need to overthrow their government or in some way change it, and find nation states that believe like we do and help them to be safe and to be a constitutional rule of law.
Mr. Westerlin, please.
Yes, thank you. You know, I would be very supportive and am supportive of partnering with countries that share our same ideas. But you know, I just got back from being overseas and spending a year overseas, and I can tell you from personal experience that there are some times where we have got to work with somebody who maybe doesn't share all of our values, but that when we work with them, that they will come to understand and appreciate the values that this nation is built upon. But I can tell you that Al-Qaeda is growing in the Sahara Desert, and we partnered with a country, and I won't name what country it was, that overthrew their president, and we withdrew. But I guarantee you, and all of the men that I worked with, Special Forces, knew and watched that Al-Qaeda was going to grow in that country and will become a base. You know, over Christmas we heard a whole lot about Yemen and that bomber who tried to blow up the Detroit airplane. If we're not careful, we're the next country that we're going to hear about, or the next region striking America at our borders and killing our citizens is going to be the Sahara.
Thank you. Mr. Denham, now you, please.
Strategic. We need to have strategic partners around the world. We cannot be the big brother of everybody on every problem. You can see our national debt continues to escalate to a point that we can't afford it, and our own economy can collapse. Now, with strategic, we've got to be ready for the future, as we were with Desert Storm. I served over in Saudi Arabia, and it was amazing. We knew that Iraq was a threat, and when they invaded Kuwait, we were ready. We had equipment there. We took care of the situation very, very quickly. We had a mission, and we defined how we were going to leave and when that mission was complete. But we've got to have strategic partners.
Gentlemen, thank you. My question now from Mr. Patterson. So many people in this valley are out of work. You know, the unemployment rate is huge. What do you see as the jobs of tomorrow, and how do we get them here to the Central Valley?
Thank you, Warren. First and foremost, I don't think it's the job of the government. I don't even think it's the job of a member of Congress to try and determine what a free market and a free economy and free people are going to be all about. It is the genius of liberty and freedom that is going to determine how we get through this economic downturn, and it will not be the government and make work. It will be people who are taking risks, who know that their government won't tax away their profit, and know that the regulations are going to be trustworthy, not onerous, and not so difficult to have to deal with. And then I think the best way we create jobs is to do what John Kennedy did, do what Ronald Reagan did, and that is cut taxes across the board and deeply. And when we do, more people will have money in their pocket. And they can do one of three things, or all three things with it. They can save it, invest it, or spend it. And when they do, they create jobs. They start to turn the economy around. It's much better for all of us instead of make-work projects by the government top-down.
Okay, Mr. Westerlin, what are the jobs of tomorrow, and how do we get them here to the Central Valley?
Well, first of all, I've got to agree, you know, it's not the government's job, not the federal government's job, to say what the jobs of the future are going to be. I'm going to leave that up to industry. I'm going to leave that up to the innovative people that fill this state and fill this valley. And our job is to get out of the way. Government's job is to get out of the way and let people, whether it's in Silicon Valley or it's here in the Central Valley, to grow jobs and do it themselves. You know, I've got a four-point plan on how to stimulate the economy and what we need to do with it. First of all is the money that's not in the stimulus package that hasn't already been accounted and out the door, stop it, pull it back, and pay down against our debt against China. 2, cut capital gains tax down to 0, at least for 36 months. I guarantee you, you will see a churn in the economy that no spending package will ever create. 3 is that we need to impose a regulation-free zone for the next, indefinitely, but at least for the next 36 months, no more new regulations by the federal government. That's how we will get things going again.
Thank you. Mr. Denham, on jobs, how do we get them here?
Well, we have to have competition. We need to be competitive with other states and other nations. We're seeing too many of our ag companies that are now leaving the state. If you look at the dairy industry, a number of them moving to Texas. Prop 2, a number of our poultry industry now leaving to other states. We've got our ag companies that are now moving more to Mexico. So we've got to make sure that we are competitive, and the regulations are driving too many out. But let me speak for my own business. You know, there's been an issue with us with taxation. I want to go out and hire more people. And rather than do overtime right now because of the high rate of taxes, we're unable to. I want to see tax cuts. I want to see our economy started again, not only here in the Central Valley, but as a nation. That's the only way we're going to get rid of our national debt. But I want to go back to something that Jim Patterson said. You know, he talked about the government not creating jobs, but yet he brought the gap here and gave away property for $1 that then we had to pay millions for after the fact. I've done the exact opposite in the state government. I've actually sold property for fair market value that has encouraged businesses to invest here.
Please. Thank you. Mr. Pombo, this question to you. We need jobs in the Valley.
Yeah, and I believe that the jobs of the future are, quite frankly, a lot of what we have right now, and that's agriculture and the agriculture base that we have in the Central Valley. We have the most fertile area in the world, the most productive area in the world, and we're strangling it to death. The government cannot create a good economy. The government can only destroy a good economy in a free market system. And quite frankly, if you want to change the future, if you want to look at what's going to drive our economy in the future, the government just has to get out of the way and let the farmers, let the ranchers produce here. We can and will continue to produce and feed the world out of the Central Valley if we have the infrastructure in place and we have the lack of all of the regulations that are killing agriculture today, driving them out of the state, driving them out of the country. We also have to change our tax system so that it supports exporting products into foreign countries. What we are doing today is so anti-business that we are destroying jobs.
All right, Mr. Patterson, I'd love to give you time to answer Mr. Denham, but we're short on time, and I've got one more time to get a question from Nancy and 30-second responses, gentlemen. If you want to put that time in there, go for it.
Okay, well, we started this discussion this afternoon with determining what conservative meant to the four of you. So let me ask what you would do with your conservatism if elected to the representative of the 19th district seat when it comes to walking across the aisle to your Democratic counterparts also from the Central Valley. How will you and can you work with the Democrats?
30 seconds, Mr. Westervelt.
Yes, you know, the magic number in Congress is 218, and anything to get done requires that number. Yes, you know what? Particularly in this valley, we have got to work together. We are underrepresented, and we need to be better represented back in Washington. So that means that, yes, I will work with my counterparts that will work with me to get legislation done. So that means working with the Democrats? Yeah, we're going to have to do that. That's the nature of politics. That's the nature of what Congress does.
Mr. Denham, please.
Well, I do think that this election cycle, Republicans are going to take over Congress. But with that being said, I think that it's important that once elections are over, it's time for all members to work together and get Republicans and Democrats working. You know, I got to tell you, the recall was the worst thing I could have ever went through. I mean, it challenged me at my core. But the very next day, I had a district issue, a statewide issue, and Don Parada, the very person who launched the recall against me, I had to work with him on that issue. You've got to put differences aside and be able to accomplish things for your community.
Time, please. Thank you, Mr. Pombo.
Well, one of the things that I am very proud of is that as serving as chairman of the Resources Committee, I passed more legislation and had more bills signed into law than all the rest of the committees combined. And I was able to do that with every bill being a bipartisan vote with the exception of one. Yes, you do have to work with both sides because you need 218 to pass things. The legislature is a body where you have to build coalitions in order to work.
Mr. Patterson, bipartisan support.
Yeah, I'm going to take just a few seconds on the gap. Number one, $750 million of investment by a Fortune 500 company, 1,000 jobs. It is the largest single tax producer in the city of Fresno for 2 school districts. It was a good deal then. It's a good deal now. Finally, I am tired of suggesting and have it suggested to me that my conservatism has to take a back seat to the left-wing liberalism of others. It is time for those in Congress, the liberals and the Democrats, to come across the aisle to us. We need to be persuasive and persistent about our conservative values, and then I think we can get some things done.
Gentlemen, thank you. We'll wrap up tonight's debate with 30-second closing statements from each one of the candidates. Those candidates once again drew lots for this, and we will begin with Jeff Denham.
Well, thank you. You've heard a lot of things in this campaign. It started with some tough attacks. I know that on the day that I announced when George Radonovich asked me to run, the first thing that came out of Jim Patterson's mouth was I was just looking for another job. I take great offense to that. I've served my country. I've started my own business. I'm a valley farmer. But when he calls me a liar, I think that we need to make sure that we're actually talking about our records. So either apologize, Jim Patterson, or sit down and debate me, but we have records to talk about. I'm proud of mine. You should be proud of yours as well.
Time, please. Mr. Westerlin, your closing remarks.
Yes, thank you very much. You know, if you like what you've seen coming out of Washington or what you've seen coming out of Sacramento, then I might not be the guy for your vote. But if you're sick of Washington, if you're sick of Sacramento, if you're sick of people taking liberties with the truth and not facing the issues that we need to face in this country, then I'm your man. Somebody who has proven results locally, proven results in my service to our country, proven results as somebody who has carried a badge. You know what? At the end of the day, we have got to go back there and earn it, and I would love to have your vote. Thank you very much.
Mr. Pombo, please.
Well, thank you. I'm sure everybody's as sick and tired of the negative campaigns as I am. I've been attacked for years. The liberal environmental groups, the liberals have come after me, and they've tried to smear me and libel me every way they can. There's one reason they do that. This is a Republican primary, and they are telling you that of everybody who's running for this office, I am the one they most fear. I go back to Washington with my seniority. I go back with a record of actually getting things done, never compromising, and fighting for what I know is right.
And finally, Mr. Patterson, thank you.
I said at the beginning, I'm a conservative first and a Republican second. Conservative ideas really matter. They're the great engine of opportunity that has made America great. I want to go back to Washington, D.C. and take your conservative values with me and insist that others come across the aisle and learn from the Ronald Reagan conservatism that I think we all share. I am asking for your vote, humbly. This is a job interview. I thank you for your consideration. Send me to Washington on your behalf, and I will champion our conservative ideals as solutions to our problems.
Gentlemen, thank you. That's all the time we have for tonight's debate. Again, thanks to all the candidates for being here. Thank you for joining us tonight. To learn more about the candidates and issues on the June ballot, check out the ABC30.com Next Gen Politics website. Just go to ABC30.com, click on See It on TV, or click on Next Gen Politics, the link at the bottom of the page. Be sure to make your voice heard on June 8th. Get out there. Please cast your vote. Thank you for joining us, and good night.